Robert Brennan plucked the county relief notice from the baby's blanket and held it up before the whole of Nevada Street. "Walker, which one are you taking?" 7 children closed around Ovie Foster, as if one answer might scatter them, while the crowd waited for Rance to choose a useful boy and leave the rest to charity. Rance stepped between Brennan and the family, kept his hand clear of his holstered Colt, and said, "None of them. All 8 come to my relay station if Mrs. Foster chooses." The street went still between the general store and the saloon. Ovie stood in a dark green dress with 18-month-old Ben on her hip. Thomas, 12, held the hands of the 2 youngest girls. Will and Sarah pressed close behind him. The other children crowded her skirts, dusty, hungry, and plainly determined to be frightened together. Rance felt every eye turned toward him. He changed horses for the westbound stage, broke troublesome stock for the overland line, and slept in a tack room behind a half-burned barn. He owned no proper house, and had never kept so much as a house cat. Yet Brennan's question had struck the one place in him that never healed, the memory of children being divided, because no grown man would stand still long enough to stop it. The relief committee had given Ovie until sundown to show a respectable roof and steady work. Otherwise, Brennan meant to petition the local justice for apprenticeship papers on the older boys and placements for the 5 younger children. He called it mercy. The way Thomas gripped his sister's hand made it look like theft. Ovie did not thank Rance. Her chin lifted, and her gray eyes searched his face for the hidden price. "What does your offer cost, Mr. Walker?" she asked. "If it buys you command of my children, take it back." A few men shifted in the dust. Brennan smiled, as though she had proved him right. "A widow and 7 children at a bachelor's relay station," he said. "The committee will call it indecent before supper." Rance looked only at Ovie. "Then we call it a 6-week betrothal. You take the room beside the cookhouse and pay for work feeding stage passengers. It gives the committee its respectable roof, while you settle your own accounts." Her hold on the baby tightened. "My earnings remain mine. We use the side room. You do not pay Brennan for me, and you do not raise a hand or a voice to my children. Your earnings, your room, your children." Rance nodded toward the livery. "My wagon is behind the store. You decide whether it moves." He stepped aside. He did not touch her elbow or turn his back on the crowd as if the choice were already made. For one long moment, Ovie stood inside the ring of her children. Then she gathered them with a glance and walked past Brennan toward the wagon. By dusk, Rance was driving 2 battered trunks, a crate of iron pots, folded quilts, 7 children, 1 silent widow, and a rocking chair with a cracked runner toward the relay station. He had suggested leaving the chair because the wagon was heavy. Ovie had looked at him until he loaded it himself. Halfway there, the youngest girl fell asleep against his back. Rance held the reins rigidly, afraid that one careless turn would wake her. Ovie noticed, but said nothing. When the child slid sideways, she reached past him, caught the little shoulder, and left her hand on the wagon seat for one quiet second before drawing it away. It was the first moment they occupied the same small space without bargaining over it. The station sat half a mile from town, a broad corral, a long barn scarred by last year's fire, a cookhouse, and 1 narrow room attached to it. Before Rance finished unhitching, Ovie had Thomas hauling water, Sarah minding the little ones, and Will gathering chips for the stove. Soon beans simmered beside salt pork, and the first eastbound passengers were eating from tin plates. Rance offered Ovie the clean cot in the tack room and said he could sleep in the barn loft. She refused before he finished. The side room was the bargain. "It has 1 bed. It has a floor." She looked past him at 7 exhausted children. "We have slept on worse." Rance carried in every quilt, then found 2 spare horse blankets and left them outside the door rather than entering without leave. When he passed the room later, the cracked rocking chair stood beside the bed, and 6 children lay crosswise on the floor. Ovie was still awake, rocking Ben with one foot. She gave Rance a tired nod through the open doorway. He took it with him to the tack room like a lamp. Rance watched from the corral fence. His yard had once kept the sensible sounds of horses' harness and wind. Now a child argued with a chicken under the wagon. 2 girls turned his water trough into a wash basin for dolls, and somebody had hung a stocking from a hitching post. Thomas approached with his jaw set hard. "I can clean stalls. We pay our way." Rance nearly handed him a fork. Then he remembered Ovie's terms. "Ask your mother whether she can spare you," he said. "If she agrees, I will pay a quarter each week for clean stalls." Thomas blinked. "You pay me?" "For work done properly." The boy ran toward the cookhouse. Rance watched him go and felt something loosen in his chest. He had not saved the boy. He had simply refused to own him. It seemed a small distinction, until he saw Ovie watching from the doorway. That evening, Rance entered the cookhouse to mark the next stage change on the slate. Ben sat on a quilt near the stove. As Rance passed, the baby seized the blue bandana at his throat and pulled with both fists. Rance froze. Ben crowed in triumph. 3 other children went silent, waiting to see what the strange man would do. "He is quick," Rance said. "He could have taken the cloth." Instead, he drew a gray neckerchief from his coat pocket and tied it on. Ben waved the blue one like a flag. Ovie's mouth softened into the first smile Rance had seen from her. It was brief and tired, but he wanted it again with an urgency that unsettled him. "His name is Benjamin," she said. "Ben, when he has earned it." The baby stuffed one end of the bandana into his mouth. "And what has he earned now?" Rance asked. "A reputation." Sarah laughed into her sleeve. Rance found himself smiling back before caution returned. He left for the tack room before he could mistake wanting for permission. But for the next hour he could hear Ben dragging the bandana across the floor and the children accusing him of theft. The noise followed Rance into sleep, and for once he did not resent it. 2 days later, Brennan rode into the yard with his ledger under one arm. Ovie came out of the cookhouse, drying her hands. Rance was working a nervous roan in the corral, but the horse ceased to matter when Brennan opened the book. "Your late husband still owed $40 for flour, medicine, and rent," Brennan said. "The committee will accept Thomas and Will as apprentices at my silver warehouse. Clear the debt in 3 years. The younger children can be placed with church families." "I washed your driver's coats and cooked for your warehouse men for 6 months, Ovie said. "That account is paid. That covered interest." Rance dropped the lead rope. Anger drove him 3 strides forward before Ovie stepped into his path and pressed one palm to his chest. She did not look back. She did not need to. Rance forced his hand away from his belt and stood just behind her shoulder. "My sons are not freight," Ovie said. "My little ones are not favors for your friends. Bring your true account, or bring nothing." Brennan's eyes flicked to Rance. "Sunday's community dinner. If the committee decides this betrothal is a sham, and you still lack means, I will ask the justice for the papers Monday morning." He rode away, leaving Ovie rigid in the dust. "I have $30 saved," Rance said. It would delay him. She turned on him. "No! A man who pays for a family often believes he has bought one." The words landed hard, because Rance knew they were earned by more than Brennan. "Then I will keep the money under the floor," he said. "Tell me where I can stand." Her anger faltered. "Behind me when I speak, beside me when they come closer." "I can manage that." Maud Pope arrived with a slate for Sarah. Before opening the schoolhouse, she had kept the Overland Station's account books and sorted its official mail, which made her one of the few people in town who understood how Brennan moved figures from one ledger to another. She heard enough of the dispute to understand the rest. Maud warned them that Brennan had the relief committee's ear. Ovie needed to prove the station could support paid work. Rance needed to prove he would not vanish when the arrangement became inconvenient. "I will not vanish," he said. Ovie's eyes held his. "Then if you change your mind, you tell me first. You do not arrange my life behind my back." The promise cost him more than she knew. Life at the station did not become orderly. It merely found a rhythm loud enough to include everyone. Rance required the yard to be cleared before each coach came in, but he asked Ovie before giving the children the rule. 3 whistles, he told them. First means gather what belongs to you. Second means get behind the fence. Third means I had better see 7 heads. "What if you see 8? Sarah asked. "Then one of the mules has learned to wear a bonnet." The children laughed. Even Ovie turned away from the washboard to hide a smile. The rule worked for one day. On the second, the 3-year-old heard the first whistle and carried a chicken behind the fence because she explained the chicken belonged to her. On the third, Will dragged the cracked rocking chair out of the coach path and broke the loose runner clean off. Rance found him staring at the damage in horror. "Your mother carried that chair across 2 counties, the boy whispered. "Then we had better not tell her we planned to burn it." Will looked stricken until Rance took out his pocket knife and began shaping an ash brace. They repaired the runner together. When Ovie later tested the chair, it rocked without catching. She looked from the new brace to Rance. "Will did half," he said. Will stood taller. Ovie rested her hand on the boy's hair. "Then both of you have done useful work." Rance liked the word both more than he should have. At dusk, he caught himself counting. 1 at the pump, 2 on the fence, 1 beneath the wagon, 2 chasing the dog. "Where is the one who limps?" he muttered. "Will does not limp," Ovie said from the porch. "His boots are too large." "You let him work in those?" "I let him grow toward them." Rance looked at her. The answer was so practical, so stubbornly hopeful, that it stayed with him all evening. At supper, Ovie placed the thickest piece of pork on his plate and kept broth and potatoes for herself. Rance carried the pot to the middle of the table, cut the meat in half, and returned 1 piece to her bowl. "Do not go hungry to keep us," she said. "I am not keeping you. We both work. The pot stays in the middle." He left before the argument could become heated. The next night the pot was already in the middle when he came in. Ovie had set a chair for him, though she said nothing about it. That small invitation disturbed his sleep more than any quarrel could have done. Each evening, Ovie walked into town for heavy laundry sacks from the boarding house beyond the saloons. Thomas began following with a length of firewood tucked under his arm. Rance noticed, because he had begun noticing every absence around her. The next morning, he traded his better-paid night relay duty for the punishing noon change. It cost him $3 a week, but it put him in the yard at dusk. When Ovie prepared to leave, he sat by the barn cleaning a bridle. "I am going to town," she said, already defensive. "So am I. The smith owes me nails." The smith did not owe him anything, but Rance found reason to walk the same road 3 nights running. He stayed several paces behind and between Ovie and the saloon doors. He never reached for her load unless she offered it. On the second night, a drunk called after Ovie. Rance stopped and turned. The man saw his face, reconsidered his courage, and found a sudden interest in the saloon wall. Rance said nothing. When he caught up, Ovie kept walking. "You looked ready to break his jaw," she said. "I was considering the wall. The wall insulted me. It allowed him to lean on it." Her mouth twitched. A serious offense. On the fourth night, she handed him one sack without a word. Its damp weight dragged at his shoulder, and he felt absurdly honored. They walked the last 100 yards side by side. At the cookhouse, she took the sack back before the children could see and call it courtship. Rance understood the caution, but he missed the weight after it left his hands. Maud spoiled the secrecy the next day by mentioning the lost wages. Ovie waited until Rance came in, sunburned and dust-coated from the noon run. "Why did you change duties?" "Thomas was going to challenge a drunk with stovewood." "You think I need an escort?" "I think Thomas is 12. Rance drank a cup of water. "Walk alone if you choose. I changed my work, not your mind." She stared at him, anger draining into something more dangerous. "You should not lose money for us." "I have enough." He wanted to say he liked the walk and the way she loosened her hairpins when the road was empty. Instead, he said, "Besides, Sarah named the gray mule Mr. Brennan. The beast has grown vain. I needed distance from him." Ovie laughed before she could stop herself. Rance felt the sound settle inside him and knew with unwelcome certainty that he had begun measuring his days by whether he heard it. Friday evening brought a sandstorm out of the west. The sky turned yellow, the wind struck the station broadside, and loose buckets raced across the yard. The stage was delayed beyond the pass. Rance fought from the corral to the cookhouse. Inside, the lamp swung on its hook. The children huddled beneath the table, while grit hissed through the wall seams. He dropped to his knees. "Thomas will brace the door with the water buckets. Sarah, take the little girls to your mother." Then he counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. His stomach went cold. Where is Ben? "Here." Ovie turned the baby under her shawl. 7. Rance spent the next hour hammering loose boards and stuffing rags into cracks. Once the barn roof groaned beyond the dark window, he did not move toward it. When the wind weakened, Thomas sat near the stove with his knees drawn up. "If the roof falls, do you lose the horses?" "Some of them." "Then you lose the station." "Maybe." "Why did you stay in here?" Rance looked at the 7 dusty faces. The answer should have been plain. Instead, it opened the oldest shame in him. "Because horses do not wait for a man to come back," he said. Later, after the children slept on quilts, Ovie poured himself coffee. "You counted them before you looked at the barn." Rance stared into the cup. "I had 2 brothers. 9 and 6 when our mother died. The bank took our farm. I left them with neighbors and went west with a freighter. I told them I would earn money and return." The wind worried the eaves. Ovie did not interrupt. "I came back a year later. The neighbors were gone. My brothers had been sent to different farms in Missouri. I never found them." He pressed both hands around the cup. "I know how to leave. I do not know how to be what waits on the other side of a door." Ovie considered him with the steady attention she gave a boiling pot. "You are not afraid of 7 children," she said. "You are afraid they will trust you to return." He shut his eyes. She did not forgive him for something he could not undo. She simply placed the blue bandana beside his cup. Ben had dried it through flour and chewed one corner. "You came back into this room," she said. "Begin there." Rance rubbed the ruined corner between his fingers. "What if beginning is not enough?" "It will not be," Ovie said. "Tomorrow you begin again." The plainness of it steadied him. No grand pardon, no promise that he would never fail. Only another morning, and the choice to be present for it. A small voice came from the quilts. 7. Thomas was awake, watching them. Rance looked around the room and counted once more, slower this time. 7. Thomas settled back down. Ovie met Rance's eyes over the sleeping children. Neither of them called the moment love, but Rance knew it had asked more courage of him than the colt at his side ever had. By morning the storm had passed. Part of the barn roof was gone, but every horse was alive. Maud arrived with worse news. Brennan had called a special meeting for Sunday's dinner. He meant to argue that the betrothal was false because Rance still slept in the tack room. An hour later, Brennan rolled into the yard in a polished buckboard. "I have the renewed Silverhall contract," he called. "Use your station for my wagons, and you will earn twice what the stage line pays. End this foolishness. Let the committee place the children, and you can own a proper ranch within a year." Rance kept repairing the barn hinge. "Refuse," Brennan went on, "and I tell the Overland superintendent you are crowding his yard with vagrants. You may lose the station." The hammer stopped. Rance's first thought was not of money. It was that Ovie would see him fail. His second was worse. If he lost the station, he could no longer give her a roof. And perhaps leaving first would spare her the sight of him becoming useless. He set down the hammer and walked toward Maud's schoolhouse. Behind him, the cookhouse door opened. He heard Ovie call his name, but fear had already made a plan for him. At the schoolhouse, you found Maud arranging primers. "If Brennan takes the station," Rance said, "could Ovie use the back room here until I find work at the mine?" The door struck the wall. Ovie stood on the threshold, pale with fury. "You promised to tell me first." Rance turned. "I am trying to make certain you have somewhere." "You are trying to leave neatly." She crossed the room. "You do not sacrifice your station, send money from a mine, and call that staying. If my children and I go, I will decide it. If we fight, I decide my part in it." He had faced wild horses with less fear than he felt beneath her gaze. "I am not trying to be noble," he said. "I am trying not to become the man who leaves children waiting. But every plan I make still begins with leaving." The anger in her face changed. Not softened, changed. "Then make a different plan." Wheels rattled hard outside before he could answer. Brennan had returned with 2 warehousemen. Thomas and Will stood on the cookhouse porch, holding pitchforks. Rance reached the yard first and placed himself between the men and the boys. "Load them," Brennan ordered. "The committee voted to place them with my warehouse until Monday's hearing." One warehouseman stepped down and reached toward his belt. Rance let his coat fall open so the colt could be seen, but he did not draw it. "You will not take a step toward those children," he said. "I will not fire in front of them. Do not mistake that for permission." The man stopped. Ovie came beside Rance, not behind him. She pulled a folded account from her apron. "Every shirt mended, every meal is cooked, every sheet washed," she said. "By your own posted rates, Brennan, you owe me $12.50. Touch my sons, and I carry this account and your altered entries to the district judge in Carson City." Brennan's face darkened. "You just lost the silver contract, Walker. I never took it." "Then you may lose everything." Rance looked at Ovie. She had asked him for a different plan. He chose the first part of it aloud. "Then we build with what remains." Brennan snapped the reins and left with his men. The threat had not vanished. Sunday's meeting still waited, and the broken roof still showed sky. But Ovie's shoulders lowered when she heard the word We. Before dawn the next morning, she turned the old cookhouse sign over and painted Foster's Eating House. Hot meals, 25 cents. Independent freighters used the road each day, and Brennan controlled none of their appetites. The first wagon stopped before breakfast. 2 freighters climbed down, looked at the rough sign, and asked whether a quarter included coffee. Ovie told them it included coffee if they washed before touching her biscuits. By noon, 5 men had eaten, 1 had paid extra for a second helping, and Sarah had discovered she could shame grown teamsters into settling their accounts by tapping the slate with a piece of chalk. Rance changed stage horses while the cookhouse filled. Each time he glanced through the doorway, Ovie was in motion, turning bread, answering prices, sending Thomas back toward his primer, and making a narrow room feel like a place men would ride miles to reach. She was not merely surviving Brennan. She was building something he could not take credit for. When the stew pot needed lifting, Ovie held out Ben without warning. Rance received the child awkwardly beneath the arms. "He bends," Ovie said. "I noticed. You are holding him like a sack of blasting powder." "I have met blasting powder with better judgment." Ben caught Rance's ear and leaned against his chest. Rance stopped breathing until the baby sighed and went still. Across the stove, Ovie watched him with an expression too soft to be pity. That look made him want a future so ordinary it frightened him. More hot kitchens, more chalk marks, more evenings when someone trusted him with what could not be replaced. Thomas hauled water for the teams. Sarah kept biscuit orders on the slate. Will collected firewood and, after a firm discussion, surrendered the pitchfork. Ovie came to Rance with flour on her cheek and business in her voice. "I require 3 things. Walk Thomas to Maud's at noon so he does not trade lessons for stable work. Hold Ben when I lift the stew pot. Count the children with me after dark." Rance looked at the woman who had made a livelihood before breakfast and offered him a place inside it without surrendering command. "I can do those things." "And one more." He waited. "When you are afraid, speak before you start walking." Rance nodded. "That may be the hardest." "Then begin with the other 3. That evening he ate in the rocking chair with the cracked runner. Ben wore the blue bandana around his middle like a sash. Plates passed over Rance's head, children argued about biscuits, and Ovie sat across from him with meat in her bowl, because the pot remained in the middle. For the first time in years, noise did not make Rance long for an empty road. Sunday's community dinner filled the hall beside the general store. Brennan sat with the relief committee, wearing the satisfied look of a man who believed the crowd had come to watch Ovie lose. She entered in her green dress, with all 7 children around her, the living picture from the street that no one had forgotten. Rance walked 1 step behind, his hat in his hands. When the tables were cleared, the committee chairman began. "Mrs. Foster, we must settle the question of the debt and whether your betrothal to Mr. Walker provides a fit household." "It does not," Ovie said. She walked to the front, removed the blue ribbon Maud had tied in her hair for the false betrothal, and laid it on the table. "There is no betrothal," she said. "I will not marry to satisfy a ledger. My children have a roof because I work. They have food because we all work. I ask the committee to judge that, not a ribbon." Brennan leaned back, smiling. Rance felt the old road open in his mind. The easy road. The one that let a man step away before he could disappoint anyone. He closed it. He went to Ovie's side. "The false betrothal ends," he said. "What I ask now is true." The room fell silent. Rance looked at Ovie, not at the committee. "I do not want my tack room back. I want a house with your voice in it. I want to hold Ben while you lift the pots, walk Thomas to his lessons, and count 7 heads with you every night. I want you for my wife, Ovie, if you can want me for your husband. Not from debt, not from fear, as my partner. Ovie's eyes shone, but she did not make the answer easy for him. The eating house books remain under my hand, she said. You ask before correcting my children. No bargain is made about them without me. And I have half a voice in the station. Half? Rance asked. A few people laughed nervously. Ovie lifted one brow. Would you prefer I say more than half? Rance's mouth moved despite himself. Half sounds generous. Then her expression opened. I choose you, Rance Walker. She gave him her hand. He took it carefully, as though strength mattered less than not closing too tightly. At the back of the hall, Thomas and Sarah pulled 2 chairs together at their table. The committee chairman had not yet found his voice when Maud Pope rose with an old Overland receipt book. Before I opened the schoolhouse, I kept the station's duplicate accounts, she said. This book records every relief payment delivered through our stop and every local agent who signed for one. She opened the ledger to a marked page. Ovie's husband died saving Brennan's silver wagon during the flood at Miller's Pass. The Overland line sent a $200 widow's payment. Robert Brennan signed for it as local agent. Brennan went white. Maud laid the receipt beside Ovie's labor account. Brennan's name and signature sat beneath the amount in faded black ink. The money never reached her, Maud said. The hall erupted. Men who had admired Brennan's prosperity began asking where the payment had gone. The committee chairman demanded the store ledger. Brennan tried to carry it out, but the constable took the book and sent a rider to the county seat. Rance did not mistake the receipt book for the victory. Ovie had refused the false marriage before she knew money existed. She had built work that belonged to her. She had chosen him only after she no longer needed him as a shield. That was the answer he had never believed a man like him could receive. A week later, the eating house fed 2 stage crews and 4 independent freighters before sunset. The returned widow's payment bought shingles for the barn and lumber for 2 more tables. Ovie kept every figure in her own book. Rance carried his bedroll out of the tack room only after asking which room she wanted him to use before the wedding. Ovie pointed to the small room beside the cookhouse. You may put it there, she said. The wedding is Saturday. Do not grow proud. I would not dare. You named a mule after Brennan. Sarah did. You encouraged her. He could not deny it. Inside, Sarah marked the supper count on the slate. 7 strokes for the children, and 1 for Ovie. Then she added a 9th. The westbound stage bells sounded beyond the rise. Rance finished checking the traces and heard Ovie call from the porch. Supper 8 voices answered with his name. He left the road, crossed the yard, and entered before anyone had to call twice. The trail still carried men away from that town every day. Rance Walker had finally learned that staying was not the promise a man made before leaving. It was the answer he gave each time his family called him home.